Legally Speaking. With me, Tarun Nangia. Today, we're going to discuss on an issue which will impact 68 crore women. It's not a small issue, and that is why the Supreme Court of India has now started thinking about it. As we seen that in the past month, Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud, Justice J.B. Pardiwala, and Justice A.S. Bopanna are mulling over an issue that relates to termination of pregnancy for unmarried women. Now, we all understand what are the sensitivities involved and why this issue is very important. And rightfully so, we've seen interesting exchange in courts on this issue, and we are all hopeful that we'll soon see a judgment which will be very progressive, because the courts of India have been very progressive as far as the issue of bodily autonomy of women is concerned. In fact, much better than other developed countries, also more so than the United States of America. And that's why a lot of women are hopeful on this one. We want to deliberate on this issue today. I have with me Advocate Niharika Karanjawala, who joins me. She's from Karanjawala and Company. Good to see you, Niharika. I have with me Advocate Ravina Lalit. Ravina joins us for the first time on Legally Speaking. Good to see you, and hoping for some interesting interventions from you since this is your first show. Alia Waziri, good to see you again. Advocate Alia Waziri, you've seen her earlier many times on the show. Good to see you again. And at the outset, let me ask Advocate Ravina Lalit to open by giving a broad overview on this issue. Ravina, you've been following this issue for quite some time. Could you share with us what all went through your mind when you followed this issue in the court, A, and secondly, about what you have read on this issue, and what would be your personal opinion on the issue of bodily autonomy of women?
Thank you. And to start with, thank you for having me. And it's a real pleasure to share the panel with such esteemed colleagues at the bar. So I have been following the issue for quite some time, and I think this is not a phenomena which is isolated to India, but something that affects women worldwide and society worldwide. I think the proceedings in court bear testament to the fact that people are recognizing the rationale or lack of it between distinguishing between women who are differently placed in terms of circumstances and in terms of evaluating the impact that is on a woman, be it mentally, socially, psychologically, financially, economically, etc., when it comes to terminating a pregnancy which is unwanted, irrespective of her social circumstances, right? So whether a woman is married or unmarried, as long as a pregnancy is something that is unwanted, which doesn't harm her or put her life in danger or have greater consequences than that are personal to her, an intervention in such a circumstance should be very rare and limited, and should only be allowed under certain specific circumstances which don't comment on her social situation or relationship situation and other factors. And I think this judgment, depending on how it bears shape eventually, will have an impact on women that are not only urban, tech savvy, educated, etc., but more so on women across the country, especially in rural areas and more isolated parts where healthcare facilities are rather limited. Interestingly, I came across a study which is from 2017, which focused on women's abortions in Madhya Pradesh and did a social profile of women who approach public healthcare institutions. And the study found that 57% women that receive abortions at public healthcare institutions come from very, very economically poor parts of societies. And it's not the abortion itself, which is a problem for them, but 67% of them face post-abortion consequences. So if we have a forward-looking outlook and judgment, those 67% women which are recorded and many others which are not recorded would have access to healthcare facilities, come with their heads held high, and have the ability to approach these healthcare facilities and get the care that they deserve and need without any legal or social stigma or bias. We must keep in mind that every time such cases are appealed from level to level, the risk to the woman increases. And that's something that we should, at the core of it, try to prevent, right? And we should try to protect her. We don't want a situation where we bring an unwanted, circumstance, which, while the state has the power to comment on at this point, which whether or not it should is another matter. But, when you control someone in this way without giving them the economical, financial, or, additional means to take care of that life, you need to evaluate the economic and social impact on society and that woman as a whole and her life as a whole. So really looking forward to what takes place and transpires here.
Thank you, Ravina. An important point which you brought through was about rural areas. I think we are at this point in time in history where millions of women for the first time have a voice as they earn their own bread. So they are not being ruled by their better halves in a sense, or patriarchal mindset in a sense. They're breaking out of the mold and having their own voice. That itself takes a lot. And to have a child or no is something which should concern the woman and woman alone in many circumstances. If the state interferes, there could be consequences there because, as you pointed out, rural areas, we're talking of people who earn very meager sums of money when they're working in factories, many times in sweatshops, but at least they make something. Earlier, they were making nothing. I'll go to Alia Waziri for her opening comment on this issue. And if you could also take forward the argument which Ravina Lalit gave. Over to you, Alia.
Thanks, Tarun. I want to begin by saying that women are not a homogeneous group. We are all differently placed. Our needs are different. We hail from different socio-economic backgrounds, socio-cultural backgrounds. But because we are talking about the abortion theme here, we have to understand shame, trauma, choice, fear, restricted access, limiting means. Now, these are some of the themes that are associated with abortion care in general. But to begin, I just say that no society evolves with the linearity of time, but its maturity can be measured with the level of fundamental rights and natural rights it grants to the historically weakest and marginalized groups. And in this case, I mean women. So what lies at the heart of this matter, it can be found in the simple truth that the fundamental right of privacy must be broadened to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy. And her marital status should not be an embargo that limits access to reproductive care. And before I say anything, I will quickly just touch on this, that the difference between the 20-week and the 24-week gap, at the end of the day, you can't limit abortions in the truest sense. I mean, it's a court of law, but no one can ban necessity. And in the absence of safe abortion, necessity will resort to illegal abortion, which will only result in increased mortality rate among women. What you do when you limit reproductive care is you limit freedom, you curtail agency. You don't outlaw the act itself. ऐसा नहीं है कि abortion होना बंद हो जाएगा for unmarried women. But at this point, we have to understand, I think something Ravina also touched upon, we have to understand the risks associated with unsafe abortions, hemorrhaging, increased infection, uterine perforation, damage to genital tract, so on and so forth. So we have to understand that we must not fail to qualify abortion as a right protected by the Constitution, which allows the woman to have a right to the highest possible physical care, the right to decide freely and responsibly on the number of spacing and timing of her children, and quite simply the right of a woman to have bodily autonomy regardless of her marital status.
That's the moot point. Women should have a right to bodily autonomy regardless of their marital status. Niharika Karanjawala from Karanjawala and Company joins me. Niharika, you have spoken on a lot of social issues earlier in addition to the work you do. You read and talk about these things. I want to know from you, when I was researching for the show, you simply speak to a few policemen and a few social activists, and they tell you that the numbers of kids being dumped after childbirth is astounding in India. It's so common that it doesn't make it to the newspapers because these stories generally don't find it place in the media. Maybe some regional papers may be reporting, but nothing much. No one would dump their kid if they are in a position to bring that kid up, which means abortion was denied at some point and there was no choice except for the cruel reality to hit and the baby is dumped many times. It is very, very sad that this happens. And this news does make it to media once in a while, and it touches a lot of people. So given these realities of India, which when we live in cities in relative comfort, we forget what this country of 147 crore people mean. Most of who, you're talking of a country where 80% of the population is on food stamps and handouts to survive. So how do you look at this issue when you, in a sense, analyze the realities of India rather than the urban class which we all belong to?
That's a very interesting question, Tarun. And I agree with Ravina and Alia completely, insofar as restriction on abortions is not a restriction on the act itself. It's simply a restriction to safe abortions. And as I said, people of greater means will probably have the wherewithal to terminate in a somewhat safe way. But people of considerably lower means will not have that and will resort to back alley abortions, unqualified medical professionals, things like that, gharelu remedies that can leave them with severe repercussions and can also in many instances result in the termination not going through, but can result in developmental issues for the child later in life, right? So the law has to progress, keeping in mind the best positive result for the greatest number of people. And as Alia said, women in India aren't a homogeneous group. They are from every conceivable aspect of society. There are a great many women for whom having a child outside of wedlock would constitute a massive stigma that will then follow them for the rest of their lives, right? Or for whom having 2 children or 3 children will result in a situation where if they are at a young age, their education cannot go any further. And it is something that it's almost cruel to say you yourself don't have a say in, right? But it's a decision that's made for you and then you have to continue with that. And as you said, there are instances without number of abandoned children in India, instances without number of children who grow up without proper care from their parents, without proper attention from their parents for a variety of reasons, who get into things like substance abuse early, get into things like a conflict with crime early. There are countless cases of women dying due to back alley abortions, right? And these are all things that the law looks to address when it moves towards a more progressive system. And it's really heartening to see not only the Supreme Court taking this view, but even the legislature, the act itself of 2021 is a really welcome change towards a more progressive system. There's still a long way to go because in India, there is still no willful termination of pregnancy. And that's a debate for another day because, that brings into account other cultural and social problems such as female feticide and things like that. Those all then get dragged in. So that's a debate for another day. But just the simple fact that even allowing an unmarried woman to seek an abortion or termination of pregnancy due to a failure of contraception working, which is something that was banned under the 71 Act. It's a tremendous move towards equality of opportunity and equality of safe healthcare, which is what I think this law is really all about. And the distinction between a married and unmarried woman for these purposes, I think Justice Chandrachud rightly observed that in a situation of abandonment, it doesn't make full logical sense that someone with a piece of paper that says they are married can qualify for a whole different set of laws in the situation of being abandoned by a life partner, and a person who does not have that piece of paper cannot qualify for them. If the logic comes from the fact that it is preferable for a child to grow in a 2-partner household and the lack of that support of a partner, either by way of abandonment or unfortunately by death, would qualify as mental anguish enough for termination, then that should be something that is available to someone who is in an intimate partner relationship, whether or not they have the sanctity of that stamp of marriage or not.
Thanks for that intervention, Niharika. I'll now take this discussion to Advocate Ravina Lalit. Ravina, 2 things. when I was speaking and researching for the show, a lot of people told me that the numbers of students going in for abortion, legal or otherwise, is astounding. Mainly in areas which are student hubs. Many times it's accidental that a pregnancy happens and there is panic. At a young age, women don't know how to deal with this situation. They're not even ready to be mothers. Of course, they're unmarried. That also is a very big stigma there. I want to ask you, in this country, which is largely it's not even middle income as of now. It's a lower income country. Majority of people don't come from wealthy backgrounds. Even state services are at best not that good, if I may mildly put it. Lack of state support. Given all this, what point should be considered according to you?
I think the question itself answers, what we need to consider. The fact that these women who are from low income groups, the fact that they've even gotten a chance to have an education which is at a higher level than probably their parents or grandparents. Most of them probably are first generation graduates and, some of them postgraduates, hopefully. The fact that these people have got this opportunity itself is a huge leap to what any other generation before them got. Now, when they're faced with these problems and circumstances, one has to step in their shoes and understand whether they will get the support that, you would expect otherwise to be given. And in my opinion, I think the answer would likely be no, given the facts and circumstances in most cases. There would be some who would rarely get that support. And in that case, their considerations would be completely different. But if we have to consider these type of students, I think we need to approach these issues with a sense of empathy, compassion, and a sense of responsibility as well, right? Because they are our future. And if we don't give them the support they deserve, if we don't give them the path through their education to pursue more and, put them in a situation where they need to take care of societal obligations, which they necessarily don't want to do in a situation where they may not be married or with parental support, then are we moving forward or are we taking 10 steps back and pushing them to 2 generations before them? So I think these are the questions we need to answer.
I want to ask you a quick question. In this case, the matter reached the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Not everybody has the money to come all the way to the Supreme Court. We are lucky that somebody found the resources and the time to, reach here. It's expensive. It's not cheap in our country to get to the higher courts. So do you think a judgment would be a direction that, such issues at best would be settled at lower courts if there are still some issues arising out of this? Because, this is a big country. Many times the rulings of the Supreme Court, till it percolates to the last hospital in a tribal area, takes a lot of time. We've seen misuse of the IT Act where, sections which have been struck down also were being used to prosecute people. So messages do take time. It's a very big country. What do you think of that?
I think such issues don't even need to come to the Supreme Court. I think, as Alia pointed out earlier, this is the way we get judgments, or what we hear or what happens around us is a reflection of issues in our society. And we need to hope to be able to mature as a society where lower courts themselves, if at all required that to, respond to these issues upfront and, grant relief as necessary and expedient and reasonable. These issues should not take time in appeal, should not even come forward at all, to be considered. Because as I said earlier, it's not just creating an additional burden in terms of appeal and the legal system and waiting for a Supreme Court to give an order, which then we hope to percolate, but it's also risking the life of that woman in every hour that lasts in further appeal and appeal and appeal.
Thanks for that input. I'll go to Alia Waziri. Alia, one point here. What we see increasingly in this country is the age of marriage for women was very less. Even 3 decades ago, women were getting married, say, at best in their very early 20s. Now, a lot of women, much earlier also, sometimes maybe before the age of 20, but now it's not uncommon for women to get married closer to their 30. So between the age of maturity, which is at the age of 13 and 14, and the age of marriage, there is a window of 15 years, which is almost 1.5 decades. It is inconceivable that a human may not form relationships between that 1.5 decade. So Do you think this angle also needs to be explored, that society is changing? You cannot box women into objects who you just get married after the age of 18, 19. So society should keep pace with, the change in law should happen as society changes. Could you delve into that aspect? You're not audible. Yeah.
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. It makes complete sense because, I mean, with education, with the passage of time, our society will progress. And you mentioned the age gap. So I want to mention that there's an excellent study by the UNFPA, which says that 13% of all young women in developing countries begin childbearing. Now, 3/4 of these girls have their first child at age 14. And then they have a second birth by around the age of 20. So half of these girls between the first child and between ages of 15 and 17 have had a second child before the age of 20. And I say this to sort of drive home the point that in India, about 45% of all abortions remain unsafe. Now, this is also about public health emergency, hospitalizing, 7 million women a year globally. But I'm saying this to highlight the fact that unsafe abortions are the third leading cause of maternal mortality in India. Now, as I said earlier, you may restrict abortion all you want. You may limit it in terms. We've seen how it happened in America. It's not like women in America are suddenly not going to seek abortions or they're not going to get pregnant. They will do what they want to do. But what will happen is you will restrict safe abortions. And come back to India, close to 8 women die every day due to unsafe abortions. And this is a 2020 report by the World Population Fund. So what will happen? Let's try to understand what will happen if we don't extend this right to unmarried women. There is data indicates a link between unsafe abortion and restrictive abortion laws. So if you were to look at, let's say, Europe, where abortion is widely legal and available because contraception is high, the rate is below 10 women per 1,000 women between the age group of 15 to 44. And then if you were to look at Africa, Latin America, so on and so forth, where abortion laws are perhaps the most restrictive, and contraception use is lower. So between the age group of mid-20s to 39, there are about 1,000 women who are dying of unsafe abortions. And before I leave you with this, I want to quickly mention that we also have to understand why. So when we look at Rule 3B Clause C, which makes the distinction between the marital status, that women who have been abandoned by, let's say, their husband or partner can seek abortions. We also have to understand why unmarried or even married women, for that matter, may be compelled to seek abortion after the first trimester, because right now it's 20 to 24 weeks. Now we have to understand that not all women are as sort of, I say this with respect to Ravina and to Niharika. We live in urban cities. We have access to good medical health. But think about women who have to travel how many kilometers to find it. You have to take into account poverty, difficulty in traveling, lack of agency, and maybe at some point they have later developed fetal abnormalities or have come to know of the health complications later. And this can't be an embargo because of their marital status. So, and I want to leave you with one tiny point, that we have to always, in what we're taught in law schools and we learn in practice, is that the statute has to be subservient to the constitution, just how the rule has to be subservient to the statute. So here, as Justice Pardiwala pointed out in this extremely progressive and manner, we have to understand that the statute does not make a distinction. It was not the legislative intent for there to be a distinction. So why should we be fixated on the matter that the rule is making a distinction between the marital status of women?
Thanks for delving into all those aspects, Alia. And one point that I would like to take up with Niharika here is that look at the simple fact that doctor-patient ratio in India is, very skewed. The other big issue, no doctor wants to go to B towns and practice. So you will see all the doctors in big cities. In fact, there is a paucity of doctors in smaller towns. But
absolutely. In fact, in smaller towns and villages, it is often people who have never been to medical school that are supplying emergency care in ERs. You don't even have to travel that far out of a big city to see that.
Yeah,
in fact,
that quacks all over.
Yeah. So we have quacks all over dispensing medical care, and that is why it is a worry. I'll take now final comments because we're almost out of time. So 30 seconds each. Niharika, our Supreme Court has been very progressive as far as the rights of women are concerned. And I'm very happy to note that I did one last show when Justice Indira Banerjee was Chief Justice. There were more than 12 women judges in that Supreme Court. There are many other issues where we are doing very well as far as women empowerment, so to speak. Do you think that we are on the right track here? We have a Supreme Court which is sensitized to the needs of women.
I think we're absolutely on the right track as far as the law goes. But as Alia pointed out, society also needs to develop simultaneously. For a lot of young women, getting pregnant outside of wedlock, for example, in small villages with slightly puritanical notions, they may be afraid that their own families might kill them out of a sense of shame. In this regard, honor killings are still a huge problem in India. Also, I feel that the entire notion of a separation between the rights of unmarried women and married women when it comes to healthcare rights, such as abortion rights, has a slightly puritanical notion, and it comes from the idea of what business does an unmarried woman have having sexual relations anyway? And that is not the ground reality in this country. And simultaneously, we need to look at other social programs such as implementing education about contraception, about safe sex, telling people in the villages as well who might well be, as you said, marched into marriage at a very young age when they are slightly naive about the world as well as about their own bodies. It is important to get information like this out there. And in some pockets of the country, there is still a notion that educating people about sex means educating them about how to have sex and encouraging them to have sex, which is a ludicrous notion because it's just education about how to have safe sex. And I think in the same way that the courts are moving us forward, society also needs to move forward.
Thanks. Ravina, your final comment. Keep in view of the fact that I think at least mobiles have reached the poorest of the poor. They are well educated as far as the laws, I mean, I'm really amazed to see that the youngsters, as far as their rights are concerned, they Google and find it out, even in rural areas these days. Your final comment before I move on to Alia for a final comment.
Yeah, you're very right. And I think whatever comes out of this will impact and they will have access to that impact as well. It's very important to realize that whether married or unmarried and irrespective of circumstance, if there is a woman who does not want to give birth into the world that she's not capable of taking care of or doesn't think it's the right time to take care of, we need to respect that decision because we are not in a society which is able to give support or develop or anything beyond a point. So we need to step back and let her take her decisions at the end of the day and make sure that whatever interpretation is given is keeping that in mind and not putting women 2 generations back, but bringing them up front into the world.
Thank you, Ravina. Very quickly, Alia, your comment.
I think we are an affirmatively legislated country, and I feel that the way the proceedings are going in the Supreme Court, I genuinely believe we will come out with a progressive statement. Because I mean, if our idea is to bring down the maternal mortality rate, which is one of the reasons why which is causing unsafe abortions, then I think this is the way forward.
Thank you, all of you, for joining on this discussion today. The key takeaway also is to say that society is developing in a certain way. The youth, which was, I think, limited to a certain cities because the youth in rural areas had no voice till date. You simply have to go to social media and see what kind of change this has brought about into simply making young girls realize that they too have a voice and they too have a choice. And we really are living in an age and time where our Supreme Court is sensitized to this. And that's why we're looking forward to this judgment. And thank you. I would like to thank so much Niharika Karanjawala, Ravina Lavit, and Alia Waziri for sparing time for this issue and joining me. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in for this one. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.